Good morning. My name is Pete Costello. I'm from Iteris. We're a company focused on intelligent transportation systems, and I've been working in mobility since 1998. So the question that I'm posing is, why do we need mobility as a service, or MaaS, and what is it? And kind of lead us into the discussion about the future of mobility. So there's a lot of people in need. Transportation, according to the World Bank, there's 1 in 7 people around the globe that lack transportation, that can't take them to a job or healthcare or education. Robbie Makinen from the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority says that mobility is the key to connecting people to opportunities. And that's a picture of Robbie. You can see Robbie's disabled, so we have that community too, to bring those folks to all the kind of services that we expect. Here in Orlando, everyone's here having a good time at the reception last night, but there's a lot of underserved people in this area. I'm a resident of Orlando. We have 15% of our households below the poverty level, 6% are without a vehicle, and you can see about 10% with disabilities, and then our aging population. So how do we get these people to health care and to the jobs and careers and education that they need to get out of this situation that they're in? So that's one thing that we're looking at with mobility as a service. And I used to work for a company called INRIX. They're a startup, although they still haven't gone public yet, but they are a traffic data company and now parking company. So in 2014, we were working with a state agency, and we were trying to get all their ITS data together, and we kind of said, what can we do with this? And we came up with the idea of mobility as a service. This is what we can offer, kind of a thing. Then we looked on the internet, and we saw that there was this paper on mobility as a service published in May of 2014, proposal for action for the public administration at Aalto University in Finland. And there's a couple of names that I want to highlight here. Sampo Heitinen, we'll talk about him and his company in a second, but Sonia, she was the one that wrote this dissertation. And there's a bunch of different definitions for mobility as a service. I hear them every day. It's like, well, my definition might be different than yours or whatever, but Sonia, since she's a co-founder, co-creator of Mobility as a Service, as it says on our LinkedIn profile here, she says mobility as a service is about seamless integration of different travel modes to generate better level of service than a private car. And that's the paper that she published, and she's still doing work, working for Skoda now in the Czech Republic on mobility solutions. But there's other definitions out there. Massify is mobility as a service for linking Europe. They say it's multimodal and sustainable mobility services, addressing customers' transportation needs by integrating planning and payment on a one-stop shop principle. And that's kind of the one that I see as a definition for mobility as a service. And then I was at TRB, Transportation Research Board, in 2016. Secretary Fox at the time, US DOT Secretary Fox, said, we should talk about taking people beyond their doorstep to opportunity, but we should also talk about bringing opportunity to their doorstep. And that's what I think mobility as a service really can help do. That first mile, last mile, everything in between, one payment, one-stop shop. So this is the framework that came out of Finland based on Sonia's work and Sampo's work. He was the chair of ITS Finland at the time. So they said, hey, here's a framework for transportation. We got some layers down at the bottom: infrastructure, fleet, transportation, service platform, the data exchange amongst all these. And then you have all sorts of different things going on. You got the sharing up here of cars and bikes, fleet, your ride share and things like that. We have the personal travel planning. I've been involved in travel information for over 20 years. The payments and parking kind of stuff, connected vehicles. If you do have a crash, how do you get the incident managers, first responders there, kind of a thing. Real-time traffic management, connecting travelers to this information, and then some kind of things that I'm not familiar with from a transportation perspective, but they have a big impact on our network. Telecommuting, e-health, e-government, e-learning, getting these services online. Can you put a mobility operator in the middle to deal with the customer to get all these services? So this is a great picture. This is where we want to be. It's hard to get there. All these different agencies that you have to deal with, and we deal with a lot of public sector agencies, very siloed, not just in their services, but the data and the frequency and the validity and the accuracy of that data between. Some of them is real time, some static. How do you put that all together? So this is the framework for what we want to do as Mobility as a Service, bring everything together in one place and have the customer make that journey from A to B in one unified manner on different modes with one payment option. So very informative, and that's kind of what I see as the definition of Mobility as a Service. And some of the goals that we want, and Sonia alluded to this, we want to reduce the use of one-passenger vehicles. If we take single occupancy vehicles out of the network, we can reduce congestion and the pollution issues and things like that Eddie mentioned. We want convenient and sustainable alternatives. In the agencies that we deal with, they don't have a lot of data, believe it or not, across modes, the whole network. How can we manage the transportation network as a whole? That's what we want to do. I see a future where parking dwindles away. We actually see parking structures that are being developed now that are hopefully easily convertible to apartment space or office space in the future, kind of a thing. We know it's an on-demand mobility system for folks like us, but what about the underserved? How can they access these services so we can lift them up? And then that planning, payment, all across modes with one kind of a payment. That's how we see things stitching together. And then I'll talk a little bit about mobility packages and seeing, if we can offer some of those and what the pricing is that we're seeing in Europe on that. And then basically no more empty seats, right? If you have empty seats in your vehicle, it's a waste of resources. Can we get more folks in vehicles? Mentioned by Eddie, vehicles sit, 90-something% of the time. I think he said 92% of the time they're empty. It's not a real good use of an asset that a lot of people invest in. How can we maximize that going forward? And then mobility costs. Eddie, I think, had 4 trillion miles in the US, 3 trillion miles? Okay. So if you look at transit, in 2013, $60 billion was spent on transit, carrying 59 billion passenger miles. So $1 a mile, that's kind of what we see is like the number that people kind of use, $1 a mile for those 3 trillion miles. So it's a $3 trillion opportunity in the US, but how do you bring that per mile cost down and offer services based on that? So we think that agencies may also have an opportunity with the issues they're facing, especially departments of transportation, relying on the gas tax. It hasn't been raised in so many years. Nobody wants to raise the gas tax. There's going to be some funding issues as we see the transition to hybrids, electrics that are not using combustion engines. So can agencies charge for transportation based on the time of day? What's the demand? Can we do some surge or congestion pricing kind of things? Where are people going from? Can we manage that better? And again, the solo ride, we want to penalize folks that are solo or empty. We hear a future that automated vehicles may just drive around empty, most of the time instead of being parked empty most of the time. So how do we penalize those folks? And then the thing that I think is, will an agency want to create some kind of a per trip fee that they're going to charge either based on vehicle miles or just the journey itself? Many of you folks may have flown here to Orlando. You paid passenger facility fees to the airports. It's built into your ticket price. You don't even know, but that supports all this construction that we see at airports around the country, those kind of fees and the growth that they're seeing there. So I think if we can take a step back and if we're looking at that $1 a mile kind of a thing, can we tell consumers exactly how much a journey costs? What's their cost of mobility? You can look at AAA. Back in 2016, they said it was $715 a month for transportation costs. 2019, it went up to $760, so we only see that going forward. But I don't know all the parameters that includes, right? Does it include the person's time? Do they have a garage and driveway? Are they paying for that in their mortgage? How can we put all that together to get a total cost of ownership? Because I think if we can show folks that they'll save money and have environmental benefits by purchasing mobility as a service, then I think we'll see the diminishing of single occupancy vehicles and mobility based on that going forward. So what are the implications for MaaS? I don't know who John Fitzgerald Weaver is, but he says he's a commercial solar guy, so he's has some electrification kind of impacts going forward. But we can see cars going from parking about 90% of the time to driving about 90% of the time. We'll need 80% fewer cars and parking spaces. The cost per mile is going to be 10 times cheaper to use a service than to own a vehicle, kind of like, rich folks today own horses, and, maybe in the future, rich folks will own cars. So if you could pay a tenth of that, dollar a mile or whatever it is, and never have to worry about, some of the stress things that Eddie talked about, would that be a good option for you going forward? So would you buy a package? Back in 2015, ITS Finland, as this mobility as a service is evolving, they thought there was some kind of urban commuter package, about 95 euros a month. 15-minute package, you want to get services within 15 minutes to you, was a little bit extra, 135 euros a month. The business folks, I don't know if you know, but over in Europe, a lot of the compensation of executives is they get them a vehicle and things like that. So I think mobility as a service may be a replacement for that company car, if you will, over there. And that was about 800 euros a month, excuse me. And then you could do your whole family for 1,200 euros. So how does that figure in? This is 2015, what they thought the market was going to be. I mentioned Sampo Heitinen. He can be called, I think, the godfather of mobility as a service. He was one of the advisors to Sonia on that paper. He has actually started a company called MaaS Global since. They're based in Finland, which is the epicenter for mobility as a service. Everything kind of started there. Initially, they thought they were going to have a basic package of about 89 euro a month, on-the-go kind of package of 149, and their unlimited business person kind of plan was, call me, we'll give you a price based on that. And that's when they initially started services back in 2016. Now in 2019, they have an urban for about $60, 60 euros. A weekend package, because you see less demand, on the weekend for some of these things, like car rental is included here for 250 euros, and unlimited about 500 euros. So, and then the pay as you go. So if you don't want to commit to a package, you could pay by journey kind of a thing. So we don't have any, since they're an independent company, we don't have any data on who's buying what plan and are they paying as you go. But I think my gut feel is that more people are paying as you go than committing to the plan over there. But they've done millions and millions of trips in Finland and the UK as a company, and they market it as an app called WIM. So I think the ultimate MaaS goal is, and we've heard a little bit about it, is the 4 ACEs. It's going to be autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. You've also heard that maybe as CASE. So I like ACEs personally, as a little poker kind of analogy there. Rather have 4 ACEs than some case of something. Maybe it's a case of beer, then we'd be okay. So what we're kind of thinking is, we can imagine a world going forward based on these kind of solutions as people transition away from the human error. Vehicles, they're going to hardly crash. Traffic jams are going to be rarities. Demand and the pollution that Eddie mentioned will drop. We're going to pay for infrastructure based on usage, not where congressmen have bridges to nowhere or whatever. I see parking lots disappearing. If you're in a hotel in a downtown space, you look out, you see a lot of parking. It's really wasted space and wasted opportunity for developers and the city. Law enforcement is going to be, we know vehicles aren't going to crash and they're going to obey safety laws, so they're not going to be out there doing traffic enforcement. Speed of deliveries are going to quicken and the cost to do that will decrease. And what I hope is seamless multimodal transportation across all different modes. As Eddie mentioned, from the scooter, from the bike, from the transit, from the subway, from whatever, the ride share kind of a thing, all those together in one package. And one method of payment. That's what I see as the new business model, if you will, opportunity. So this is where we think the future is going to be. Uber thinks so as well, going from the crowded, roadways that we have. These aren't as crowded as the ones that Eddie showed, but we think the future is going to be a lot more better flowing traffic where you don't have to worry about those kind of things. Here's my contact info if you want more details. I started a group on LinkedIn called Transportation Mobility as a Service back in 2015. We have over 900 professionals that exchange information in that group. So please join and get in the conversation. Those are the end of my comments.